So last Monday we looked at sati, this quality of mindfulness, as the third spiritual faculty. And so today we're going to explore the fourth one, samadhi. This is usually translated as concentration, but I really prefer to translate it as collectedness or even unification, because this quality of samadhi is not really about concentrating or efforting to achieve or attain something. Rather, it's the natural way that awareness becomes collected or gathered in one place. And it arises all on its own when mindfulness is present and when its other causes and conditions are also present. So this is not something we have to effort for. So as in previous weeks, I'll offer a few reflections on this quality first, and then we'll meditate together, and then I'll open it up for your comments. I hope that sounds okay. So let's step back a moment and consider these 5 spiritual faculties that we're looking at this month. Sada, faith; virya, energy; sati, mindfulness; samadhi, collectedness; and panya, wisdom, which we'll be looking at next week. And all of these are described in the suttas not as attainments or achievements that we kind of tick off a list, but rather as living qualities, emergent qualities that are dynamic and balance each other when the causes and conditions are present. And although it's true they usually are shown and offered and taught in this specific sequence that we're following, they work together and they support each other. And often the metaphor of a chariot team is used. Not that we have many chariots around anymore, but I'm going to use it anyway. With the spiritual faculties being like the horses, 5 horses. And they need to be matched and balanced. And this is the job of the leading horse, the horse out front, if you like. And that horse is, of course, mindfulness. And then comes the first pair of horses, faith and wisdom. If faith is too strong, then we can risk falling into naivety or blind faith. But if wisdom is too strong, then we risk becoming perhaps overly intellectual or even cynical or detached, cold. But faith and wisdom together, these 2 horses, they balance each other. And then, of course, there's the second pair of horses, energy and collectedness. There's too much energy without enough collectedness, then the mind can become really tense and constricted and scattered. But if there's too much samadhi, too much collectedness without enough effort, then the mind can grow dull and lazy. So once again, these 2 horses of energy and collectedness can balance each other. And then when we bring all 5 horses into the team, we can progress on the path to awakening. But notice what this framing, what this description, this way of thinking about these 5 spiritual faculties does. It makes them relational. It makes them interdependent. They're not separate or fixed states. They're not independent from each other. They're held together. They work as a team. And I think this can really change the way that we practice with these 5 faculties. So I just wanted to say that as a kind of prelude context. So let's get back to samadhi or collectedness now and be a little bit more precise about what it is. And the Pali word comes from the verb samadati, which means to place together, to compose, to unify. The commentatorial definition of samadhi stresses non-distraction, non-scatteredness. So this isn't the forceful holding of attention that we might think it means, but rather it's the absence of the dispersal of attention. It's the absence of a scattered mind. I think this is maybe a subtle, but it's a really important distinction. Samadhi is not about gripping or holding on to something or wanting something to happen. Quite the opposite. It's a releasing of the causes of scatteredness. So because it's about this, it's really helpful to think about what actually causes the mind to scatter and disperse. So on the one hand, of course, we've got craving that's pulling the mind forward all the time. And then we've got aversion on the other hand that's keeping the mind stuck. We've also got restlessness and worry that set the mind pacing. And then, of course, there's sloth and torpor that say, why bother? Or something like that. And doubt fragments the mind into indecision. Of course, these are all hindrances. And samadhi deepens all on its own as they quieten down, as these hindrances quieten. We can't manufacture samadhi. We can't manufacture collectedness, but we can remove what gets in the way of it. So samadhi is very much about releasing the push and pull of the hindrances. And then from that releasing, from that letting go, joy and ease arise all on their own, not as something that we're striving for, not as something that we add to our awareness, but something that was always there beneath the hindrances and the disturbances. Just like the sky is always there behind the clouds. So mindfulness is one of the causes and conditions of this quality of collectedness. The more mindfulness we have, the more collected the mind will become. But the sutta describes some other causes and conditions that support samadhi as well. And the first one of these is sila, ethical conduct. And this is because when we act, when we behave in our lives with honesty and integrity, then we are virtuous. Or as the suttas say, then we are blameless. And then the mind is naturally calmer and more peaceful. When there's no guilt and no remorse are present, the mind can naturally settle and incline towards collectedness because nothing is there to disturb it. As I've heard Jack Hornfield say, I love this quote, he says, it's difficult to experience samadhi if you've just robbed a bank. So I encourage you to develop and maintain your own sila, which of course means practicing with the precepts as if they mattered, because they really do matter. So that's one of the causes and conditions for collectedness, sila. A second quality is renunciation or simplicity. In other words, being content with little, being content with less. And in this culture that we live in of consumerism and materialism and abundance, renunciation is very countercultural in my experience. It goes against the grain. But each time we feed a desire, even if it's a very small, ordinary kind of wanting, we are in a subtle way training in the opposite of collectedness and composure. So simplifying our lifestyles, reducing unnecessary stimulation and unnecessary distractions, real long periods of deep and inner listening and silence. These are not about enduring hardship or doing without for their own sake. These are precisely the conditions in which samadhi will strengthen all on its own. So renunciation and simplicity are another quality that strengthen our samadhi. A third one is appropriate or wise attention, yoniso manasikara in Pali. We can support the development of our collectedness by paying attention to what is peaceful, what is calm, what is beautiful. The Brahma Viharas, for example. So when we turn the mind to what is beneficial and wholesome and calming, we're more likely to strengthen this quality of samadhi. So by being mindful, by maintaining our sila, by being content with little, and by paying attention to whatever is calming and beautiful and peaceful, we can diminish or even remove the hindrances to a collected mind, a mind with samadhi. There's one more thing I'd like to say about this quality this morning. That is that in the Theravada tradition, we sometimes speak about two paths. There's the path of samatha, calm, abiding meditation, in which we train our minds to focus on a single object, a single meditation anchor. For many of us, that's the breath, because this weakens distractions, builds mindfulness, calms restless thoughts, and also helps to strengthen samadhi. So that's one path. And then there's also the vipassana, or the insight path, which involves seeing the true nature of reality. And historically, as you may know, there's been a lot of debate about how these two approaches of samatha and vipassana, these two approaches to meditation, and how they're related. Can you do insight practice without having a completely calm and settled mind of samatha practice? Can you do insight practice when there's still some disturbances in the mind? So rather than taking sides in this debate, I want to point out that the texts are actually very consistent about one thing, and that is that a collected mind, a mind with samadhi, sees more clearly, has more insight. Not because it's a preliminary that you have to complete before you can start insight practice, but because these two approaches, collectedness and insight, are qualities that strengthen each other, practices that strengthen each other in real time, both on the cushion and in everyday life. I think we can see this. This is what the Buddha's pointing to in the Kimsuka Sutta. It's a mouthful, which is Samyutta Nikaya 35-204, in which he compares practitioners to people who are looking at the same tree from different distances. So if you're far away from the tree, you can see only the outline of the tree, perhaps the trunk of the tree and the big branches. But if you're closer to the tree, you can actually see the bark and the fineness of the branches. But if you're closer still to the tree, you can see the individual leaves. In other words, the closer you get, the more composed and steady the attention, the more we can see the true nature of things. Samadhi, collectedness, helps us to see impermanence more easily, the arising and passing away of experience. Becomes clearer when the mind is more settled and can really observe the subtleties of change. Second, when we're closer to the tree, when the mind is more collected, it's easier to see suffering, dukkha, the unsatisfactoriness of craving and clinging and aversion become a lot more apparent when the mind is not scattered. And thirdly, when we're closer to the tree, not self, anatta, the experience of not finding an independent, fixed and homogeneous self becomes really undeniable, because the samadhi is stable enough that you can watch phenomena arise and pass away without there being anyone producing them. So this is samadhi as a spiritual faculty, not as a once and done attainment, not just the bliss of jhana, but a quality that supports and deepens insight and that makes the practice more alive. So let us hold samadhi wisely, not as something to attain or achieve, not even as evidence that we're good practitioners, but as a living quality, something that arises on its own when the hindrances are in abeyance. The Pali texts describe a mind with strong samadhi as workable or malleable or flexible, a mind that is ready to investigate, ready to release, ready to see things as they truly are. And that readiness, I think, is available to us now, not somewhere else, not at some time in the future, but right here, right now, in this sitting that we're about to start. We can begin to collect our attention, to see the hindrances that get in the way of that collectedness. And this is enough. So thank you for listening, and let's move now to our meditation period.